So, like Catherine said, my name is Emmet Stafford. I'm a local archaeologist and I'm going to be chairing for the day. So from the chairman's point of view, or chairperson's point of view, if we maybe keep questions, we really want to interact with the audience. We want you guys to join in. We want to see what you think about what we're talking about. But rather than asking questions during the talks, if myself and Angelique Lefay, who get to give the first couple of presentations, get through our work first, we can all relax and have a coffee and then have a little question and answer session. So if that's okay, we'll progress with that. Unless someone has a burning need at the end of the talk to stick in if we have a few minutes. Anyway, my talk is called Continuity and Change. And I think it's because I come from a slightly archaeological perspective rather than a historical one. I like to think about the ordinary people and what's going on in their lives during these monumental periods of historical change. I think it's fair to say that the perception in the southeast in Ireland as a whole is that many people assume that the 1169 arrival of the Anglo-Normans in southeastern Ireland is a moment which changes Irish culture completely and forever. This perception is reasonable enough, but it may have its roots in the surviving primary sources of the conquest period, which are generally the product of the Anglo-Norman writers such as Gerald de Barry, and whose tone could be argued to have influenced Irish historians writing in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And when we talk about confusion and identity issues and identity complexes, if we even look back at Gerald himself, here he is, as enshrined in St David's in Wales. We call him generally Geraldus Cambrensis, because he wrote primarily in Latin. Gerald of Wales is the easiest way to approach him in the English language which we speak today. Gerald Kilmero is what he would have been known locally because he was a Welshman. His grandmother was the famous Princess Nesta of Wales, even though his father was a French-speaking Norman knight. And I would imagine most of his contemporaries actually called him Gerald Barry or something like that. Gerald, the son of Barry, and French was his first spoken language. And as confused as poor old Gerald's identity is, that's really what history leaves us with the 12th century. Although we think it's a time of huge change revolving around the year 1169 and 1170, in reality the pre-Norman 12th century was already a period of economic and social change before the arrival of Fitzstephen, Strongbow, Gerald, Henry II. And although the rate of change was accelerated by the initial phases of the Anglo-Norman conquest, much of the material culture and everyday life of the average Irish person continued to evolve as it had done in the pre-Norman period. So what I would like to do for the next 30 minutes or thereabouts is to focus on the life experience of the population of southeastern Ireland in the 12th and 13th centuries by examining the sites and artefacts which our ancestors left behind them. And this should give us an appreciation for the development of domestic life and social experiences of the Irish population in the early years following 1169. The physical remains of medieval society could be roughly broken down into rural and urban settlement, trade, religion, architecture, and I'm going to look briefly at those separate topics before attempting to summarise the consequences of the early Norman period. So pre-Norman rural settlement is typically considered to focus on the ring forts or rads, which are still so common in the Irish countryside. Ring forts, which are enclosed or defended farmsteads of the early medieval period, are one of the most common archaeological monuments in the Irish countryside. And upwards of 40,000 ring forts have been identified on the island of Ireland. If you have a brief look at the archaeological inventory of County Wexford, it suggests that there are 600 ring forts in County Wexford alone, surviving or known. The ring fort, of course, this is the Irish National Heritage Park on the top left-hand corner, and on the bottom right-hand side, a more typical Wexford ring fort. One that's completely denuded, one which has no palisade or gate or ditch, no houses, no cattle around it, but one which is still visible in the countryside. Interestingly, although they are perceived as a quintessential native Irish settlement, what Gerald de Barry might have thought of as an instant response to an uncivilised pre-Norman cultural practice of cattle raiding, the construction of ring forts actually reaches its peak before the late 10th century, and seems to have been on the wane well before the arrival of the Anglo-Normans. And this is the kind of cultural change we're experiencing in Irish society before the 12th century. The reasons for a shift towards a less enclosed form of settlement are not entirely clear, but they may indicate a more peaceful or centrally controlled society with a decrease in violent raids across territorial boundaries. And that might be reflective of a more effective control of territory by powerful kings, such as Dermot MacMurrough in the immediate pre-Norman period. But after the arrival of the Anglo-Normans, ring forts are joined in the Irish countryside by campaign castles like the Motte and Bailey. If you go up to St Mullins today in County Carlow and you look at the Motte up there, you'll think that these simple earthen mounds aren't really all that imposing, but nothing like them preceded the 12th century in Ireland, and their appearance was a really imposing symbol of a changing political reality. The Motte Castle was such an important symbol of Norman conquest that it's included in the Bayeux Tapestry of the Battle of Hastings. And that's really important when we think about these Anglo-Normans. We call them Anglo because they come from roughly the island of Britain, and Normans because their ancestors come from Normandy. But they'd only spent 100 years in Britain before they got here. This is 1066, William the Conqueror landing at Hastings, and the first thing he does is he enslaves a few local English fellows, gives them some shovels and picks, and he tells them to build a big mound so that his Norman partners can build a tower on top of it. And this is a reconstruction drawing by an artist called John Hodgson of one of those Motte and Baileys. You can see on the right hand side a big earthen mound with a ditch around it, a palisade on top, a tower, and that is the reality of the 13th century Anglo-Norman conquest in Ireland. But it diminishes a little bit over time. This is the Motte and indeed the Bailey. If anybody's confused between the Motte and the Bailey, the Motte is the mound, the Bailey is the little enclosure around it in which people actually live. The mound would have been surrounded by palisade, as I said, topped by a wooden or stone tower, and these mottes were such an imposing statement in the landscape. It's no coincidence that they were often built adjacent to the early monasteries, which were amongst the few nucleated settlements in 12th century Ireland. This is the early Christian, early medieval and later medieval and indeed modern churchyard and monastic site of St Mullins on the right hand side. And what's really nice, I don't know if you can see my little pointer, if you climb to the top of that mountain today, bring a plastic bag with you because you can slide back down the fast way down. You can see the footings of the wooden of the stone footings of what was probably originally a wooden tower on top of that motte. They're still standing there today, despite centuries of Wexford and Carlow boys and girls upbraiding the place, using it as a fun zone. But the Motte and Baileys of the 12th century conquest are not the direct equivalent of the pre-Norman ring fort, which we were speaking of as a typical form of Irish settlement. The function of the defended farmstead is directly replaced by moated sites. Like ring forts, the moated sites tend to be situated in prime farmland. They start to arrive in the 13th century in Ireland, and they're surrounded by a deep ditch or a moat surrounding an earthen bank, and they generally have a substantial gated entrance. This is a reconstruction drawing by the late archaeologist Simon Dick of a site in Wexford, Coolamurray, which I actually found in archaeological testing. I didn't excavate it, another archaeologist did. What's really interesting about finding that site just outside Davidstown was I was in a greenfield site, I was undertaking some archaeological testing, there was a little corner over there, I probably would have got there eventually, and the son of the landowner, or the brother of the current landowner, came in and said, I remember my father hiring a steam shovel, whatever that is, and flattening a mound over there. Maybe you should go and have a look. And there's no archaeological evidence, no map evidence, but local knowledge pulled a professional archaeologist into the corner of the field and revealed this really fine example of a moated site in some of the best farmland in Wexford. About 190 of these sites are recorded in County Wexford alone, which shows how dense that Anglo-Norman settlement of the county was. And thanks to Anglo-Norman records, because they write things down a little bit more assiduously than the Irish come before them, we know a lot about these structures and their residents. The construction of a new moated site at Ballyconnor in Wexford, which is near Ross, is recorded in the Bigod accounts of 1283-84. So these are the accounts of the manor and the lands and where they were spending money. The detailed account of that 700-year-old project includes the wages paid to the carpenters who constructed the farmyard's fence and gate. And if anybody wants to know the cost of a skilled day's wages for my ancestor, Thomas de Stafford, carpenter of New Ross, in 1283, was 4 pence per day. And that's a bit of pay sin. Anyways, the moated site was often the centre of a medieval manor. occupied and farmed by an Anglo-Norman knight in the 13th and 14th centuries. Archaeological excavations have shown that in some locations, mistake. I should be careful with crossing my arm. Archaeological excavations have shown that in some locations, the moated site builders deliberately chose to occupy the site of an earlier ring fort. And that continues the pattern of settlement in the Irish countryside throughout the early Anglo-Norman period. This photograph is of a site called Bonacafur near Tullow in County Carlow, where a very substantial tribal ring fort was reordered in the 13th century into a really big moated site. Now, ring forts are circles of earth with a ditch outside them. A bivalent ring fort is a more socially significant site. It's got 2 circles of earth and 2 ditches. And way less than 10% of ring forts on the island of Ireland are trivalent. They've got 3 ditches, 3 banks, they're very socially significant sites. And one of those was chopped up shortly after the arrival of the Anglo-Normans. Can you see my dot? You can. See this little line here? That's the ditch of a ring fort. Most ring forts would end there, and the farmyard would be in a circle inside. This one had 2 ditches, and they had 3 ditches. And the Anglo-Norman lord who came along and took over this manor, filled in the inner 2 ditches, enlarged the external ditch, and made it a huge big site. And whenever I show this photograph, I always show this. This is a typical Irish archaeological crew of about 8 or 10 years ago. And I'm always told that archaeologists dig holes with toothpicks. And if you can find 8 guys who dig that hole with some toothpicks in about 8 weeks, I'd like to hire them, please put them on to me. So, shovels and picks and trowels and all kinds of things obviously were used. The moated site, I've already said that. Also in County Wexford, as this is a County Wexford job, limited investigations, not as big as this big in County Wexford, have shown me that at least 2 ring forts, at Kinna and at Harristown in the south of the county, rather than being abandoned in the late 12th century, which you would imagine if there was a huge cultural change in the landscape, that Anglo-Normans would come in, kill everybody, take over all the sites, abandon the original settlement sites and build their own. At least 2 sites in County Wexford, and they're just the 2 that we've managed to dig some holes in. They were the sites of substantial domestic and agricultural activity in the 13th and 14th centuries beyond the arrival of the Anglo-Normans. So this is not an isolated instance. So that's briefly rural settlement.